Right now, controversy over the removal of a slavery exhibit at Independence National Historical Park. Today, all that's left, empty bolt holes and shadows on the brick walls where panels once stood at the president's house site. Some critics today coming to the site, adding protest signs in their place. The removal coming following an executive order from President Donald Trump that specifically called out Independence National Historical Park for what the president called a widespread effort to rewrite our nation's history, replacing objective facts with a distortive narrative driven by ideology rather than the truth.
Hey guys, Adam is here. Okay, so this just happened. Trump's administration just got absolutely humiliated in federal court. And this one's going to sting for a while because a judge didn't just slap down one of his policies. She literally ordered him to undo something his people already did.
A judge orders a slavery exhibit that was removed from the president's house at Independence Mall be reinstated. The announcement came as dozens of people gathered at the site on this President's Day 2025-26. They were there rallying for those panels to be put back. Good evening, everyone. I'm Yuki Washington. The ruling for the exhibit to be restored came after the city filed a lawsuit when the National Park Service removed the panels last month.
Something so brazen that even the court couldn't ignore it. Here's what went down. Trump's team quietly walked into a historic site in Philadelphia, George Washington's former home, and they started taking things down.
Welcome back. The courts once again are pushing back on the Trump administration this morning. A federal judge ruling yesterday that the Trump administration must temporarily return displays that discuss George Washington's ownership of slaves to Washington's former home in Philadelphia. The preliminary injunction comes after the city of Philadelphia sued the Interior Department and the National Park Service after they removed the displays last month.
Not just any things. They removed an entire exhibit about slavery. They erased displays about 9 enslaved people who George Washington kept at that house. Just gone, like it never happened.
Well, guys, the federal judge who sided with the city on Monday says the government is not complying with her order. So today, she is giving the federal government until 5 p.m. on Friday to return this historic site to the way it was before all those exhibits were removed. Now, you can see behind me here, barricades have been set up at portions of the president's house site here. I did speak with some National Park Service staff members who were out here today. They told me those were put in place in preparation for pressure washing. However, right now, it's unclear when this will happen, especially as this legal battle continues to play out.
Trump's people thought they could just walk in and whitewash history and nobody would notice. Except people did notice. Historians noticed, civil rights groups noticed, museum advocates noticed, and they sued. They dragged the Trump administration into federal court and said,
On this President's Day, crowds gathered at the president's house on 6th and Market Street in Philadelphia to protest in a fight to restore several slavery exhibits. And today, a federal judge ruled that the exhibit's removal was unlawful.
Yeah, it's a fight that's been going on for nearly a month. And News 8's
You can't just erase slavery from American history because it makes you uncomfortable. And Judge Cynthia Rufe agreed. On February 16th and 17th, just days ago, she issued an order that told Trump's team, put it all back, every panel, every artifact, every single piece of that exhibit about enslaved people, restore it in its original condition. This is wild because it's not just a policy fight. This is about whether a president can literally control what history gets told in a museum. Can the government just walk into a historic site and say, we don't like this part of the story, let's delete it? And a federal judge just said, absolutely not. The ruling is devastating. Judge Rufe didn't just say, maybe think about putting it back. She said the challengers are likely to succeed in their lawsuit, meaning Trump's going to lose this case. She said the removal irreparably harms the public interest in an accurate, unabridged account of the nation's founding, including the central role of slavery. That's a judge telling the president, you're trying to lie to the American people about our history, and we're not going to let you. We're in 2026, and the President of the United States is in court being ordered to restore an exhibit about slavery because his administration tried to make it disappear. This isn't some conspiracy theory. This is documented, verified, ruled on by a federal judge. Trump's team erased slavery from a museum and got caught. This isn't happening in a vacuum. This is the same administration that's been pushing what they call patriotic education, which is code for don't teach kids the bad stuff about America. They've been attacking school curriculums that talk about racism. They've been going after anything that sounds like the 1619 Project or critical race theory. And now we see what that looks like in practice. It looks like walking into George Washington's house and removing the parts about enslaved people. The exhibit wasn't even controversial before this. It was about 9 real people who were enslaved by George Washington in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, a city moving toward abolition at the time, which made their stories even more important. These were names, lives, people whose existence mattered, and Trump's administration said, "Too uncomfortable. Take it down." So now the judge has forced them into this humiliating climb down. They have to put it all back. They have to admit in practice that what they did was wrong, and this is happening while Trump is already under fire for a dozen other things. Courts blocking his election changes. Courts blocking his funding cuts to blue states. Judges telling him over and over, "You can't just do whatever you want." This case is bigger than one exhibit. It's about whether the government can control the past, rewrite it, sanitize it until it fits whatever narrative they want. And right now, a federal judge just said, "No, you don't get to do that. Not ever." Let's dig into what actually happened. George Washington's house in Philadelphia isn't just some random building. This was where Washington lived while he was president. Philadelphia was the capital back then, and Washington kept enslaved people there even though Pennsylvania was moving toward abolition. The state had laws, the city had activists, and Washington was shuttling enslaved people in and out of the state to avoid freeing them under those laws. He was gaming the system to keep people in bondage. The exhibit that Trump's team removed was specifically about 9 of those enslaved individuals. It had their names, their stories, descriptions of their lives. It explained how Washington exploited legal loopholes to keep them enslaved in a city trying to end slavery. This wasn't some vague history lesson. This was detailed, uncomfortable truth about one of the founding fathers, and that's exactly why Trump's people wanted it gone. Trump has spent years building this narrative that America's founders were perfect, that the country's history is nothing but glory, and that anyone who talks about slavery is trying to tear the country down. He's pushed this idea that teaching kids about the bad parts of history is anti-American. He's attacked educators and tried to force schools to teach only the good stuff. This exhibit didn't fit that narrative. It said, George Washington owned people. He exploited them. He used legal tricks to keep them enslaved. That's fact. But for Trump, that's a problem. So his administration decided to fix it by erasing it. They didn't announce this. They didn't hold a press conference. They did it quietly. They just walked in, removed the panels, and hoped nobody would notice. Like if we just delete this stuff, maybe people will forget it was ever there. Except people didn't forget. Historians noticed immediately. Civil rights groups noticed. And they didn't just complain on Twitter. They filed a lawsuit. They took the Trump administration to federal court and said, "This is illegal. You can't just walk into a historic site and censor history because you don't like it. That violates federal historic preservation laws. That violates the public's right to know the truth about our past." Judge Rufe looked at the case and said, "You're right." She issued a temporary injunction ordering the Trump administration to restore everything they removed in its original condition while the lawsuit moves forward. But here's where it gets really interesting. The judge didn't just say, "Put it back and we'll see." She made it clear that the challengers are likely to succeed. That's legal language for, "You're probably going to win this case." She said the removal likely violates the law and irreparably harms the public interest in an accurate account of the nation's founding, including the central role of slavery. A federal judge just said the public has a right to know the truth about slavery, and Trump's administration tried to take that away. That's not a partisan attack. That's a straightforward legal conclusion based on the facts. Trump's team erased history, and the court said, "Put it back." Trump's defenders will spin this. They'll say, "It's just one exhibit. The judge is overreacting." But this isn't about one exhibit. This is about a pattern. Trump has been doing this over and over. He's attacked the 1619 Project. He's gone after critical race theory. He's pushed executive orders to remove diversity training. He's tried to force schools to teach only positive stories. Now we see what that looks like in practice. It looks like walking into a museum and taking down the parts about slavery. That's not protecting patriotism. That's censorship. That's the government deciding what version of history you're allowed to see. Here's the scary part. If they got away with this, what's next? Do they start editing textbooks? Do they remove slavery from Civil War exhibits? Do they rewrite the story of the civil rights movement? Where does it stop? Because once you say the government can control what history gets told, you're giving them the power to lie to you. The lawsuit argues that Trump's move violated federal historic preservation laws, which protect sites like George Washington's house from being altered or censored. Those laws exist because we decided as a country that our history matters. All of it. Even the uncomfortable parts. We can't just delete the stuff that makes us look bad. We have to face it. But Trump doesn't see it that way. For him, history is a political tool. It's something you shape, something you control, something you use to win arguments. And if the truth doesn't fit your narrative, just change the truth. Remove the exhibit, rewrite the story, pretend it never happened. Except you can't do that when there are laws and courts and people willing to fight back. Historians and civil rights groups stood up and said, "We're not letting you whitewash slavery out of George Washington's story." And a federal judge agreed. So now Trump's administration has to undo the damage. They have to restore the exhibit. They have to admit through their actions that what they did was wrong. And that's humiliating because this is a clear case of the government trying to censor history and getting smacked down by the courts. This ties into everything else happening with Trump. He's losing in court over and over. Judges have blocked his attempts to change election rules. Judges have blocked his funding cuts. Judges have told him repeatedly that he can't just do whatever he wants. And now a judge is telling him he can't erase slavery from a museum. This is the pattern. Trump pushes the boundaries. He tries to grab power. He does something outrageous. And the courts step in and say, "That's not how this works." Every time it happens, it chips away at his image as a strong man who gets things done. Because the reality is he keeps losing. He keeps getting stopped. He keeps having to back down. On an issue like this, slavery and historical memory, this isn't just a legal loss. This is a political disaster. The story isn't Trump lost a court case. The story is Trump tried to erase slavery from a museum, and a judge had to force him to put it back. That's a headline that writes itself. That's a narrative that sticks. Trump's already struggling with non-white voters, young voters, educated voters. And now he's in the news being ordered by a court to restore an exhibit about enslaved people because his administration tried to make it disappear. How does that help him? How does that make him look like anything other than someone trying to whitewash history? It doesn't. This is pure damage. This case is about what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget. Trump wants America to forget the bad parts. He wants us to forget slavery, forget racism, forget all the ways this country failed to live up to its ideals. Because if we forget, we don't have to confront it. We don't have to ask hard questions about how the past still affects the present. But forgetting doesn't make the past go away. It just makes us ignorant. It makes us repeat the same mistakes. Those 9 enslaved people, their names, their stories, they're part of our history. They're part of George Washington's story. And we have a responsibility to remember them, to tell their truth. Not because it makes us feel good, but because it's real. Trump wanted to erase that. He wanted to pretend it didn't happen. And a federal judge said, "No, we're not erasing history. We're not lying to the public. We're not letting the government control the past." So what happens next? The Trump administration has to comply with the court order. They have to restore the exhibit, and the lawsuit will keep moving forward. Based on what the judge said, Trump's probably going to lose, which means this whole thing, the removal, the fight, the embarrassing climb down, it was all for nothing. This is just one more example of Trump overreaching, getting smacked down, and looking weaker because of it. One more court loss, one more judge telling him, "You can't do that." One more crack in the image of the strongman president who gets things done. Trump tried to erase slavery from a museum and he lost. That's the story, that's the headline, and that's going to stick.